Formula One CEO Stefano Domenicali has just revealed his plans for the sport's future, and they could upend everything. The sport has been undergoing major changes, both technical and commercial, since Liberty Media purchased a controlling interest in the Formula One group, and there is no stopping the train. Domenicali's latest proposal aims to make F1 a more exciting spectacle for both fans and drivers, and will undoubtedly influence how championships play out. Without further ado, let's look at how the sport will evolve in the future, how it will improve racing, and why you should be excited. The British Grand Prix featured the first sprint race in the Formula One 2021 season. Their inclusion on the calendar was intended to increase excitement throughout a Grand Prix weekend. Since then, the rumor mill has been spinning with new stories about further format changes. Both the 2021 and 2022 seasons feature 3 sprint race events. The number of sprint events in 2023, on the other hand, has been a hot topic of discussion this season. The FIA first delayed, then rejected a proposal to double the number of sprint races to 6 in 2023, and the races that will host sprint events next year have yet to be determined. However, the Brazilian Grand Prix is the only race that takes place in both seasons. But it seems things have really turned around since the summer break, with many people at the top of F1's hierarchy looking into what they can do for the sport to make it more enticing to new audiences. Domenicali spoke with the media at the Belgian Grand Prix about the aggressive measures he intends to take regarding weekend format changes. He stated, "Every time we're on track, there should be something to fight for in terms of points or award. I would like to see any single session on that track, apart from the first maybe, to award something." This would imply that Domenicali wishes to transform at least the free practice 2 and 3 sessions into sessions that will award championship points to drivers and teams. Another idea he has is to shuffle the grid order for every Grand Prix, either by using reverse order sprint races to make Sunday's grid allocations a little more chaotic, or by using a different qualifying format entirely. So far, the teams have not all been enthusiastic. However, Domenicali points out that when the field is shuffled, as it was at Monza last weekend due to grid penalties, the race is exciting and results in some good overtaking. He believes Formula One has an obligation to give the format a shot. "We put a lot of ideas on the table. Many say no to them, but we have seen a few times that random starting positions for really exciting races with many overtaking maneuvers. We're almost obligated to try it. It is a need that cannot be postponed to have even more show. I would like to always fight for something that is worth the title. We will address the issue in the next F1 commission. The fans, the organizers, everyone wants it. The sprint race was just the first example that could be improved." Stefano Domenicali reflected on his time at the top of the sport, saying that one of his greatest recognitions was the American stars who came to the race in Miami, claiming that this was the place to be. When asked what gave him the most satisfaction, Domenicali mentioned last year's championship battle, which went down to the final lap of the season. He noted that, for the first time in decades, Formula One has gained traction in the mainstream market, not just among enthusiasts who are already interested in everything related to fast cars driving in circles. He claims that by creating different content for different audiences, such as new types of storytelling seen on Netflix's Drive to Survive, F1 has been able to reach its current popularity peak, but it does not end there. Domenicali's ambitions in this regard are nearly limitless, and the sport as we know it may change forever in the coming years. If you thought sprint races were a controversial idea, just wait to see what Stefano Domenicali has in store for us. But not everything is as simple as that. Formula One is, and has always been, resistant to change. Consider when the halo was first introduced. Even drivers like Sebastian Vettel, the director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, was hesitant to accept the halo, despite being one of the most progressive drivers on the grid. So something that exists solely to make races more interesting, but ultimately takes more control away from the driver? Well, best of luck with that. Back in 2019, plans to have qualifying races at some events based on the reverse of the current World Championship order were rejected by the teams. The following year, however, F1 Managing Director Ross Brawn wanted to revive the idea after the Italian GP's mixed-up order contributed to an exciting race, with Lewis Hamilton attempting to come through the field after taking a penalty. In theory, the new Concord Agreement allows new ideas to be incorporated into the regulations with the agreement of only 8 of the 10 teams. And, as luck would have it, it was Sebastian Vettel who first shot down the idea. I think it's completely wrong. Obviously, it's a testimony that if you are pushing in that direction that you have failed to come up with regulations and tools that bring the field more together and make racing better on track. As a reminder, we had new front wing regulations which cost everybody a fortune, but ultimately haven't changed much in terms of racing. I think it would be wrong. That is exactly the type of criticism that is currently being leveled. The pattern here is obvious. Formula One has a problem because the sport has become stagnant and racing has deteriorated. The problem is not due to the format, but rather to technical regulations that make cars follow each other more closely. Then those at the top propose band-aid solutions that are rejected by drivers and teams. Okay, maybe it's not so bad. After all, the sprint race weekend has been largely positive in the sport, and as we all know, Formula One has finally changed things up on the racing front, with cars finally being able to follow each other after this year's regulation changes. While sprint races were slow to catch up at first, look no further than Lewis Hamilton's miraculous comeback at last year's Brazilian Grand Prix. If not the greatest drive of Lewis Hamilton's life, it was certainly the most astounding. Never before had a Formula One car won from a position lower than 8th on the grid at Interlagos. That the 7-time world champion managed it from 10th to 3rd in 18 laps before sweeping past his implacable nemesis Max Verstappen with 12 laps to spare was one of the finest feats of his career. All thanks to the sprint format, which allowed Lewis Hamilton to make up half of the positions on Saturday after being disqualified for rear wing violations in qualifying. Nonetheless, some argue that because the sprint race determines the grid for the full points-paying Grand Prix on Sunday, there is less incentive to risk an overtake. However, F1 has a solution. It is understood that they are considering making the sprint race a standalone event for next season. This could lead to Friday qualifying determining the grid for both Saturday and Sunday races, with the sprint only rewarding points to increase how much drivers compete with one another. Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc has expressed his support for the proposal, saying, "This could be a thing. This will help us to take a bit more risk maybe during sprint qualifying without losing too much on the Sunday, in case you do a mistake. It could add a bit of value of excitement for the Saturday. This actually could be a good idea." Ahead of the Italian GP sprint event last year, F1 Managing Director of Sports Ross Brawn had forwarded the idea of morphing the Saturday race into a standalone event. Haas driver Kevin Magnussen, who contested his first sprint event in Imola, also supported Friday qualifying setting both grids. I think the qualifying idea is a good suggestion. If the qualifying on Friday meant the grid position for Sunday and also for the sprint race, that could be quite fun. You add another spectacle point to the weekend, you can fully go for it in the sprint race. The Dane went on to say that the current format forces drivers to choose between fighting for track position or risking a crash and starting the race from the back of the grid. However, Aston Martin racer Lance Stroll expressed his preference for keeping the current format, citing the benefits of the current risk-reward balance. He stated, "I like the way it is. There are points and there's risk-reward. I thought that was the whole idea of the sprint race, to make it interesting for the fans. I think it is nice to see drivers that are maybe further back fighting for positions on Sunday. And if you're starting up at the front, you might not like that so much, but that's how it is. I wouldn't want to see that change. I think if it is going to be a sprint, it might as well be a proper sprint that puts pressure on Sunday." So, not everyone is in agreement. However, there is a significant difference between what is being said now and what was said a few years ago, with very few, if any, drivers now openly opposing the sprint weekend. So, as frightening as it may appear, Stefano Domenicali's radical plans for the sport may turn out to be an improvement. But what are your thoughts? Should Formula One pursue more exciting racing, even if it means radically altering the Grand Prix format? Should the sports executives instead concentrate on technical and financial changes that will bring teams closer together and allow cars to follow each other? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. It helps us out a lot.